Angela Davis stepped off the international flight from Paris, her heels clicking softly against the polished tile floors of Los Angeles International Airport. Known to the world as LAX, a sprawling behemoth of terminals where dreams arrived and departures carried away the weary. The air was thick with the mingled scents of overpriced coffee, recycled oxygen, and the faint metallic temps of jet exhaust that seeped through the ventilation systems. A constant reminder that this was a gateway between worlds, a place where borders were enforced with unyielding precision. It was a bustling afternoon in 2025, the sun dipping low over the Pacific, casting long shadows through the massive glass windows that overlooked the tarmac, where planes taxied like obedient giants. Under the watchful eyes of ground crews in fluorescent vests, Angela, a renowned investigative journalist whose byline had graced the front pages of major outlets for over a decade, felt the familiar pull of home after days immersed in the intellectual fervor of the International Journalism Conference in the City of Light. She had delivered a keynote on the ethics of digital media in an era of deepfakes and disinformation, her words echoing in a grand hall filled with peers from every corner of the globe. But now, all she craved was the quiet sanctuary of her Brentwood home, where her husband Michael waited with a glass of her favorite Cabernet and stories from his high-stakes world as the U.S. Attorney General. Her outfit reflected her poised demeanor, a silk blouse in soft ivory that draped elegantly over her frame, paired with tailored slacks and a leather satchel that held the tools of her trade, its supple material worn from years of travel. She moved through the customs line with the practiced efficiency of someone who had crossed oceans more times than she could count, her dark curls tied back in a neat bun, her expression one of mild fatigue tempered by an inner resolve that had seen her through exposés on corporate greed and political scandals. Little did she know that this routine re-entry would unravel into a confrontation that would test the very fabric of her composure. As the line snaked forward, Sergeant James Carter, a veteran customs officer with 15 years on the job, scanned the crowd from his booth, his eyes narrowing like a predator assessing prey. James was a man shaped by a lifetime of resentments. Growing up in a small Midwestern town where opportunities seemed reserved for those who looked nothing like the diverse throngs he now policed, his gut instinct, as he called it, was less intuition and more a cocktail of biases fermented over years of unchecked assumptions, reinforced by locker room banter and selective news feeds that painted certain demographics as perpetual suspects. He prided himself on his ability to spot trouble, a term he applied liberally to anyone who didn't fit his narrow vision of deference and belonging. And today, his gaze locked onto Angela as she approached. She was too composed, too well-dressed, for someone emerging from economy class, or so he assumed, ignoring the first-class stamp on her boarding pass tucked away in her bag. Her confidence irked him, a silent challenge to the authority he wielded like a blunt instrument in this sterile domain where badges trumped reason. When Angela reached the counter, she offered a polite nod, sliding her deep blue U.S. passport across the laminate surface with a quiet "Good afternoon, officer." James didn't reciprocate the courtesy. Instead, he snatched the document with a grunt, his thick fingers leaving smudges on the gold-embossed eagle that symbolized the nation's sovereignty. He flipped it open, lingering on her photo as a professional headshot where her eyes held a spark of intelligence and defiance that made his jaw tighten. The electronic scanner beeped its approval, but James wasn't satisfied. He began paging through the visa stamps, each one a testament to Angela's global pursuits. Ethiopia, where she had reported on humanitarian crises amid drought-stricken landscapes. Argentina, delving into stories of political upheaval in Buenos Aires' vibrant streets. Germany, covering economic forums in Berlin's modern halls. And now France, the fresh ink from Paris, still crisp. To Angela, these marks were badges of honor, milestones in a career built on uncovering truths that others preferred hidden. But to James, they screamed suspicion. a narrative he constructed in his mind of illicit dealings masked by professional facades. "Paris, huh?" he drawled, his voice laced with sarcasm as he leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms over a uniform stretched tight across his paunch. "What brings a lady like you jet-setting around like that? Must be some fancy business." Angela met his gaze steadily, her voice even and professional. "I was the keynote speaker at the International Journalism Conference. It's part of my work as a journalist." James let out a scoff, a short bark of disbelief that drew sidelong glances from nearby travelers shuffling their feet in impatience. "Journalism? Yeah, right. Ethical stuff, I bet. And all these stamps Ethiopia, Argentina, Germany. You've got a really flexible job, don't you? Pays well enough for all this globe-trotting." The insinuation hung heavy, implying sources of income that skirted legality, a jab designed to provoke, to chip away at her poise and reveal what he imagined was a hidden vulnerability. Angela felt the familiar sting of such microaggressions, echoes of a lifetime navigating spaces where her achievements were questioned not for merit, but for melanin. But she refused to rise to the bait. Instead, she replied calmly, "My profession requires travel, Sergeant. My finances are handled appropriately, as per IRS regulations." Her restraint only fueled his irritation. Like pouring gasoline on a smoldering ember, he expected deference. Perhaps a stammered explanation, not this unflappable dignity that made him feel small in his own kingdom. Narrowing his eyes, he tapped the counter with a pen, the rhythmic click amplifying the tension. "Step aside to secondary inspection, ma'am. We need to verify a few things." Angela's brow furrowed slightly, but she complied without protest, knowing that resistance could escalate matters in this no-man's land of federal oversight. "On what basis?" she asked, her tone measured, seeking clarity rather than confrontation. "On my authority," James snapped, his voice rising just enough to assert dominance, drawing the attention of a few curious onlookers who quickly averted their eyes, unwilling to get entangled. He escorted her to the adjacent glass-enclosed room, a clinical space with stainless steel tables and harsh fluorescent lighting that cast unflattering shadows. Where other passengers sat in uneasy silence, their own inspections unfolding like minor dramas in a theater of bureaucracy. "Empty your bag," he commanded, his stance wide and imposing as he loomed over the table. Angela unlatched her satchel with deliberate slowness, placing items one by one. Her laptop, sleek and password-protected, containing drafts of articles that could topple reputations. A leather-bound notebook filled with her precise handwriting. Notes from interviews with whistleblowers and sources. A novel she had picked up in a Parisian bookstore, its pages dog-eared from mid-flight reading. And finally, a small silver-framed photo of her and Michael on their wedding day, captured in a sunlit garden where laughter lines etched their joy. James's eyes flicked to the photo, his lip curling in a sneer at the sight of the interracial couple. With his sharp features and authoritative presence, arm wrapped protectively around Angela, a union that challenged James's worldview in ways he couldn't articulate but deeply resented. He rummaged through her wallet next, pulling out her driver's license, press credentials from prestigious organizations, and credit cards that spoke of financial stability earned through hard-won accolades. Angela Davis on the license, but Angela Reed on the passport. "What's the story?" "Playing games with names," he accused, tossing the items back haphazardly. "Davis is my professional name. Reed is my married name." "It's standard practice," Angela explained, her patience thinning but her exterior unmoved. A skill honed from years in adversarial interviews. James wasn't buying it. He picked up the passport again, holding it under the light as if expecting hidden flaws to reveal themselves. His fingers tracing the subtle embossed seal from the Department of Justice, a perk for spouses of high ranking. Officials that expedited processes but meant nothing to his untrained eye. In fact, it only reinforced his delusion of forgery. This looks off. Photos too polished, stamps too perfect. High-quality fake, I'd say, he muttered, his voice dripping. With false expertise. Angela's voice dropped to a steely whisper. Asterisk, that is an authentic U.S. passport, Sergeant Carter. I advise you to proceed carefully. You're on thin ice here. The warning ignited something primal in him, a surge of defiance against what he perceived as arrogance from someone he deemed unworthy. He had dealt with types like her before, or so he told himself, people who thought rules bent for them, and he relished the power to remind them otherwise. With a smirk that twisted his features into something ugly, he reached into his pocket and produced a cheap plastic lighter. The kind sold at gas stations for $1, its wheel scarred from frequent use. The room fell into a hushed anticipation. As he flicked it to life, a small blue flame dancing erratically. Gasps escaped from the other detainees, an elderly couple clutching their visas. A young student with wide eyes as James held the passport aloft. Time to file this away for good, he declared, bringing the flame to the corner of the blue cover. The material resisted at first, blackening and curling like a leaf in autumn, then igniting with a whoosh that sent acrid smoke curling upward, the smell of melting laminate filling the air. Angela watched in horrified fascination as the flames consumed page after page, her photo warping and bubbling, the golden eagle distorting into a grotesque smear. Stamps from distant lands vanishing in puffs of Ethiopia's intricate visa, dissolving Argentina's bold ink charring, Germany's precise markings erased, and France's recent addition fueling the blaze. The DOJ seal, that subtle mark of privilege, melted away unnoticed by James, who held the burning document with triumphant glee, his face illuminated by the orange glow, eyes reflecting a mix of vindication and malice. He dropped the smoldering remains onto the table, where it sputtered out, leaving a blackened husk that symbolized not just the destruction of a document, but an assault on identity itself. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the distant hum of airport announcements and the soft sobs of a witness who couldn't believe the audacity unfolding before them. James turned to Angela, expecting to see defeat, tears perhaps, or a rage that would justify further action. But her face was an impassive mask. Her eyes locked on the ashes with a resolve that unnerved him more than any outburst could. In that moment, as the gravity of his impulsiveness began to dawn in the recesses of his mind, though he pushed it away with bravado, the seeds of his downfall were sown. For Angela's calm was not weakness, but the quiet gathering of strength, a prelude to a reckoning that would extend far beyond this confined room. She stood there, unflinching, her mind already racing ahead to the consequences. The exposure, the opportunity to turn this outrage into a catalyst for something greater, while James, oblivious to the hornet's nest he had stirred, puffed out his chest and reached for his handcuffs. Muttering about arrests for fraud and resistance, his voice now tinged with the uncertainty he couldn't quite mask. The other travelers shifted uncomfortably, one discreetly pulling out a phone to capture the aftermath. The red recording light, a harbinger of viral infamy that would soon engulf him. Angela's thoughts drifted briefly to Michael, to the life they had built together, a partnership of equals where her career stood independent of his influence, yet intertwined in ways that provided unseen safeguards. She had always insisted on navigating the world on her own terms, refusing to invoke his name as a shield. But now, in this violation, she pondered the intersections of personal pride and systemic injustice, vowing silently that this act of petty tyranny would not define her, but propel her forward. James, meanwhile, replayed his victory in his head, convincing himself that this was justice served. Blind to the fact that his lighter had ignited not just paper, but the fuse to his own professional demise, a chain reaction that would unravel the threads of his authority in ways he could never anticipate. As the smoke cleared and the acrid scent lingered, the room held its breath, poised on the edge of transformation where one man's hubris clashed with a woman's unyielding spirit, setting the stage for a narrative that would captivate a nation and demand accountability from the shadows of power. As Angela stood there in the stark, glass-walled secondary inspection room at Lax, the acrid remnants of her charred passport still wafting through the air like a bitter accusation, she felt the weight of the moment settle over her not as defeat, but as a clarion call to action. Her heart pounded with a rhythm that echoed years of resilience forged in the fires of subtle and overt discrimination boardrooms where her ideas were dismissed, streets where her presence drew unwarranted scrutiny, and now this, a blatant act of destruction that stripped away not just a document, but a piece of her autonomy. Yet outwardly, she remained a statue of composure, her dark eyes fixed on James Carter with an intensity that made him shift uncomfortably, his earlier triumph flickering like the dying embers on the steel table. He had expected her to crumble, to beg or rage, but Angela's silence was a weapon sharper than any words. It was the quiet before a storm that would soon engulf him in ways he couldn't yet fathom. The other travelers in the room, a mosaic of weary faces from various corners of the Globan Indian family, clutching their visas with white-knuckled grips, a solo backpacker from Australia staring wide-eyed at his phone, and a businesswoman from Japan discreetly adjusting her position, held their collective breath, the atmosphere thick with unspoken outrage. One of them, the backpacker, had the presence of mind to keep his phone steady, the recording capturing every flicker of flame and sneer on James's face, a digital testament that would soon propel this isolated incident into the global spotlight. James, emboldened by his impulsive act, yet sensing the shift in the room's energy, reached for his handcuffs with hands that now trembled slightly, the metal clinking like a feeble attempt at reclaiming control. "You're under arrest for presenting fraudulent documents and obstructing an officer," he barked, his voice cracking at the edges, the bravado leaking out like air from a punctured tire. He stepped forward, his bulk casting a shadow over Angela, but before his fingers could graze her wrist, voice sliced through the tension like a scalpel through flesh, calm, authoritative, and utterly devoid of emotion. "That's enough, Sergeant. Step back immediately." The command came from the doorway, where two men in impeccably tailored dark suits had materialized as if conjured from the ether, their presence altering the room's dynamics in an instant. They were unassuming in stature, one with close-cropped salt-and-pepper hair and wire-rimmed glasses that reflected the fluorescent lights. The other, younger, with a clean-shaven face and an earpiece subtly visible beneath his collar. But their demeanor screamed federal precise movements, eyes that scanned and assessed without a hint of hesitation, the kind of quiet power that didn't need badges or bluster to command respect. James whirled around, his face flushing red with a mix of confusion and indignation. "Who the hell are you?" "This is a secure area customs jurisdiction only," puffed up his chest, trying to reassert the authority that had moments ago felt absolute. But the older agent, whom Angela recognized as Special Agent Elias Harris from her protective detail, didn't flinch. Harris's voice remained level, a monotone that brooked no argument. "Special Agent Harris, Department of Justice Protective Services. This woman is under our protection. Remove your hand and stand down, or you'll be facing additional charges for unlawful detainment." The words landed like stones in still water, rippling outward and freezing James in place. Protective Services, DOJ. The acronym swirled in his mind, but he couldn't connect the dots yet. All he knew was that these men carried an aura of inevitability, like shadows lengthening at dusk. The younger agent, Ramirez, positioned himself at the door, his hand resting casually near his hip, where a concealed sidearm undoubtedly waited, his gaze sweeping the room to ensure no further escalations. Angela, for her part, felt a subtle wave of relief wash over her, not from fear, for she had never truly been afraid, but from the knowledge that her safety net, insisted upon by Michael after a series of death threats following her expose on a corrupt pharmaceutical empire 2 years prior, had activated precisely as designed. They were ghosts in her life, always present but rarely seen, tailing her through airports and events with the invisibility of professionals trained in discretion. Harris stepped forward, his eyes briefly meeting Angela's in a nod of acknowledgement, a silent confirmation that the situation was now under control. "Ma'am, we'll handle this from here," he said, his tone professional and impersonal, as if addressing a dignitary rather than the wife of his ultimate boss. Turning back to James, he continued, "Sergeant Carter, badge number 892, you have just committed a federal offense by destroying a valid U.S. passport issued to a protected individual. Surrender your weapon and credentials to your supervisor immediately." James's mouth gaped open, his mind reeling. How did they know his badge number? His name. The details hit him like punches, eroding his confidence further. "Protected? What do you mean, protected? She's just some journalist with a fake ID." He stammered, but even as the words left his lips, doubt crept in, a cold finger tracing his spine. Ramirez, from the door, spoke for the first time, his voice equally flat. "Supervisor is en route. Do not move." As if on cue, the door buzzed open again, and in rushed Mr. Thompson, James's direct superior, a lanky man in his 50s with a perpetual look of harried exhaustion, his tie askew and forehead beaded with sweat from the sprint across the terminal. Thompson took one look at the agents, the smoldering passport remnants, and James's frozen posture, and his face drained of color. "Agents... I got the alert. What in God's name happened here?" he wheezed, his eyes darting to Angela with a mix of apology and dread. Harris didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Director Thompson, your officer has violated multiple federal statutes, including destruction of government property and civil rights infringement. Secure him now. We'll coordinate with your internal affairs." Thompson turned on James with a fury born of self-preservation, his voice a harsh whisper. "James, you fool, what have you done? Hand over your gun and badge." Now James complied, numbly, his hands shaking as he unholstered his service weapon and placed it on the table beside the ashes, the clatter echoing his crumbling world. As Thompson cuffed his own subordinate, humiliating reversals, James's eyes locked onto Angela again, searching for clues in her unflinching stare. Who was she, really? The pieces were falling into place too slowly for him. The seal on the passport he had dismissed as fake, the swift intervention, the mention of protection. A sickening realization dawned that he had overstepped into a realm far beyond his petty domain, like a guard dog biting the hand of its master's ally. Meanwhile, the backpacker's video, uploaded in a haze of adrenaline to his social media account, with the caption, "Insane racism at lax cop burns woman's passport," began its viral ascent. Within minutes, shares multiplied like cells dividing, algorithms pushing it to timelines across the country, first to friends in travel groups, then to activists monitoring police misconduct, and soon to influencers. With millions of followers, comments flooded in. "This is America in 2025. Disgusting. Share this everywhere. Hold him accountable. Looks like blatant profiling." The footage, grainy but unmistakable, showed James's sneer, the lighter's flick, the passport's blaze, and Angela's stoic silence, a narrative that needed no narration to evoke outrage. By the time Angela was escorted out of the room, flanked by Harris and Ramirez like silent sentinels, the video had hit 10,000 views. trending under hashtags like #LaxRacism and #BurnedPassport in the black SUV waiting curbside. Its tinted windows shielding them from the airport's chaos, Angela slid into the back seat, the leather cool against her skin. Harris took the wheel, Ramirez shotgun, their communication devices buzzing with coded updates to headquarters. Angela pulled out her phone, ignoring the barrage of notifications for now, and dialed Michael. The line connected instantly. "Angela, are you all right?" The detail briefed mime, mobilizing everything. Michael's voice, usually steady as a courtroom gavel, held a rare edge of fury, the kind reserved for threats to those he loved. As Attorney General, he oversaw the nation's law enforcement apparatus, but in this moment, he was just a husband, his mind racing through scenarios of retribution. "I'm fine, Michael. Physically, at least," Angela replied, her tone measured, though the adrenaline's aftershocks made her fingers tremble slightly on the device. "But this? It's bigger than U.S. That officer didn't just target me. He represents a system that's broken, one that lets bigotry hide behind badges." Michael paused, absorbing her words. "I know. I've got teams on IT internal review at Customs, potential charges. But Angela, he humiliated you. I want him buried under every statute we can throw." She shook her head, even though he couldn't see it. "No love. That's vengeance, and it'll feel good for a day, but it won't fix anything. I want to expose the training gaps, the ignored complaints, the culture that breeds men like him. Use this as leverage for reform." As the SUV merged onto the freeway, the Los Angeles skyline blurring past in a haze of golden hour light, Angela's mind shifted from victim to strategist. She had built her career on stories that peeled back layers of injustice. Her Pulitzer-winning series on racial disparities in healthcare, where she embedded in underfunded clinics to document lives lost to systemic neglect. Her deep dive into voting suppression tactics in swing states, interviewing disenfranchised voters whose voices echoed her own family's history from the civil rights era. This incident, raw and personal, could be her most powerful piece, yet not a tale of personal woe, but a blueprint for change. Harris glanced in the rearview mirror. "Ma'am, we've secured the scene. Evidence collected, witness statements incoming. The video's already out. They expect media frenzy by morning." Angela nodded, her resolve hardening. "Good. Let it spread. Transparency is the first step." Back at LAX, James sat in a dimly lit holding room, the kind typically reserved for smuggling suspects. His wrists now free, but his spirits shackled by the unfolding nightmare. Thompson paced before him, phone glued to his ear as he fielded calls from higher-ups. "You idiot. James, that wasn't just any passport. It had a DOJ expedited seal. And her? She's Angela Davis Reed, the journalist. Wife of the goddamn Attorney General." The revelation hit James like a freight train, his stomach churning as memories flashed. The photo in her bag? The white man Michael read. The nation's top cop, whose face graced news channels daily, overseeing FBI, and yes, even influencing Customs protocols. The seal he had burned wasn't fake. It was a mark of elite access, one he had obliterated in a fit of ego. Nausea rose, and he bolted to the sink, retching as the implications cascaded. Lawsuits, unemployment, public shaming. His phone, confiscated but buzzing in Thompson's pocket, was likely exploding with alerts friends, tagging him in the viral video. Family calling in panic by evening, as Angela arrived home to Michael's embrace in their Brentwood estate. Modern haven with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking manicured gardens had already outlined her plan. Over dinner, a simple pasta Michael had prepared to ground them in normalcy. They discussed strategy. "I'll recuse myself from direct involvement," Michael said. "But I can push for a DOJ audit of airport security nationwide. Your article could light the fuse. Angela smiled faintly, the first crack in her armor. Exactly. I'll interview former officers. Poll complaint data show how incidents like this aren't isolated but endemic. As night fell, the video surpassed 1 million views, pundits on cable news dissecting it. This is emblematic of deeper issues in border enforcement. One analyst opined, while another called for James's immediate firing. Social media amplified voices from marginalized communities sharing similar stories. Latinx travelers groped during pat-downs. Muslim families interrogated for hours, turning Angela's ordeal into a collective cry for justice. The next morning, Angela woke to a world transformed. Her inbox overflowed with interview requests from CNN, MSNBC, and even international outlets like the BBC. Michael's office fielded congressional inquiries. Senators demanding hearings. James, released on administrative leave but under house arrest pending charges, watched his life unravel from his modest apartment in Inglewood. The TV blaring his face on every channel. Disgraced officer and viral video identified links to Attorney General's wife spark outrage. Protests formed outside LAX, signs reading "End Badge Brutality" and "Justice for Angela." Angela, however, retreated to her study, fingers flying over her keyboard. Weaving data from public records, over 5,000 complaints against customs officers in the last decade. Only 2% leading to discipline, and to a narrative that humanized the statistics with anonymized anecdotes. She reached out to sources, a retired agent whistleblower who revealed lax bias training, a civil rights lawyer with case files on similar abuses. This wasn't a repetition of her trauma, it was evolution, each paragraph building toward a call for mandatory body cams, independent oversight boards, and cultural shifts in hiring. As days blurred, the story evolved beyond the initial shock. Angela's opt graft grew, incorporating expert quotes from psychologists on implicit bias, economists on the cost of discriminatory delays to commerce, and historians tracing airport security's roots in post-9/11's paranoia that disproportionately targeted minorities. Michael, true to his word, initiated a task force, briefing the president in a secure call where Angela's name was invoked as a catalyst. Protests swelled, drawing celebrities and activists, while counter-narratives emerged defenders of law enforcement claiming James was a bad apple. But Angela's emerging voice reframed it. Bad apples spoil the barrel if the orchard is neglected. James, isolated and paranoid, hired a lawyer, but leaks of his past reprimands for aggressive conduct sealed his fate. The can deep long. L's of the agents had set off a chain reaction, transforming personal indignity into public reckoning, ensuring that Angela's story wouldn't fade but flourish as a beacon for reform. By week's end, with her piece submitted and hearings scheduled, Angela felt not vindicated, but empowered. The silent intervention had amplified her voice, turning a moment of darkness into a dawn of possibility, where justice wasn't about one man's fall, but a system's rise. As the digital storm ignited by the Backpackers video raged across screens nationwide, Angela Davis Reed found herself at the epicenter of a national conversation that transcended her personal ordeal, morphing into a broader indictment of systemic flaws within U.S. Customs and Border Protection. The footage, now dubbed the LAX Inferno by online commentators, had amassed over 5 million views within 48 hours. Its raw depiction of James Carter's act, his smug grin as the passport ignited, the flames devouring pages of stamps from Angela's global journeys, fueling a torrent of shares, memes, and think pieces. Social media platforms buzzed with hashtags like #CustomsCruelty and #EndAirportBias, drawing in voices from civil rights advocates to everyday travelers recounting their own brushes with overzealous officers. Angela, sequestered in her Brentwood home office with its panoramic view of the Hollywood Hills bathed in the soft glow of dawn, scrawled through the deluge, not with vindictive glee, but with a journalist's analytical eye. She noted patterns in the comments. A Latina woman from Texas describing hours-long detentions at border crossings for no reason other than her heritage. Asian American businessmen detailing invasive searches at JFK that seemed predicated on his ethnicity. A black family from Michigan sharing stories of racial profiling at the Blue Water Bridge in Port Huron, where officers allegedly targeted vehicles based on skin color. These anecdotes weren't anomalies. They echoed reports she had begun compiling, drawing from public records and whistleblower accounts that painted a picture of an agency plagued by unchecked discretion. Michael, ever the strategist, paced the room with a coffee mug in hand, his phone vibrating incessantly with updates from his DOJ aides. The president's office called their monitoring. Congressional leaders want briefings. This could force real oversight. Angela nodded, her fingers hovering over her laptop keyboard. That's exactly what I want. Not just for me, but for everyone invisible in these stories, she had decided. Against immediate interviews, opting instead to channel her energy into a comprehensive op-ed that would serve as both expose and manifesto. Titled Beyond the Burn, Unmasking Systemic Bias in America's Gateways, the piece began not with her own narrative, though she wove it in as a hookbutt with data. Over 5,000 complaints filed against CBP officers between 2020 and 2025, with only a fraction leading to meaningful discipline, according to internal audits leaked to advocacy groups. She cited a 2021 lawsuit by black CBP agents in Michigan who accused the agency of ordering racial profiling, forcing them to target minorities in traffic stops near the Canadian border. Angela delved deeper, referencing a 2023 American Immigration Council report on CBP's involvement in racial justice protests, where agents were deployed to monitor Black Lives Matter demonstrations, blurring lines between border security and domestic surveillance. She highlighted Puerto Rican travelers facing disproportionate scrutiny at ports of entry, as documented in a 2021 University of Puerto Rico Law Review article, where Hispanic and Latino individuals were often funneled into secondary inspections, based on ethnicity alone, to avoid redundancy in her writing. Angela structured the article as a multi-layered investigation. First, the human cost, illustrated through anonymized interviews she conducted remotely of former CBP whistleblower from Arizona who described mandatory quotas for detentions that incentivized profiling. A civil rights lawyer in New York, recounting cases of Asian travelers subjected to random electronic searches that felt anything but random. She transitioned to the institutional failures, critiquing the 2023 CBP non-discrimination policy updates as superficial, noting how a June 2025 policy reiteration still lacked enforceable mechanisms for accountability, such as independent civilian review boards. Angela incorporated economic angles, drawing from a UNIDOS report from January 2025 on how racial profiling led to family separations and economic harm in immigrant communities, estimating billions in lost productivity from delayed entries and wrongful detentions. She avoided dwelling on her own incident repetitively, using it sparingly as a pivot to broader reforms, mandatory implicit bias training with measurable outcomes, body cameras for all frontline officers, and streamlined complaint processes integrated, with DOJ oversight as the op-ed took shape over sleepless nights, punctuated by Michael's supportive presence, bringing her herbal tea and debating phrasing the public. Backlash against James Carter intensified. His identity leaked through. Anonymous tips to media outlets transformed him from an unnamed antagonist in the video to a national pariah. News segments dissected his personnel file, revealing prior reprimands for aggressive conduct during inspections, including a 2022 incident where he detained a group of Mexican day laborers at a San Diego checkpoint without probable cause. Echoing NPR's July 2025 coverage of immigration raids targeting Latino worker hubs. James, holed up in his Inglewood apartment with curtains drawn against the paparazzi drones buzzing outside, watched his life implode on cable news. Anchors on MSNBC labeled him a symbol of unchecked power, while Fox News attempted a defense, framing it as an isolated overreaction. But even they couldn't ignore the video's damning clarity. His phone, now a relic after he smashed it in a fit of rage, had been flooded with death threats and disowning messages from distant relatives. His wife, a schoolteacher who'd stood by him through previous controversies, packed a bag and left. For her sisters, whispering, "You crossed a line, James. This isn't who I married." Alone, he replayed the moment obsessively. The lighter's flick, Angela's unyielding gaze, the agent's arrival. The revelation of her identity, wife of Attorney General Michael Reed, had hit like a sledgehammer, conjuring images of federal prisons and ruined pensions. He hired a cut-rate lawyer from a late-night ad. But the man was blunt. Plea deals, your best shot, civil rights violations, destruction of property. Could be 10 years. Meanwhile, Angela's op-ed landed like a bombshell when published in the New York Times on a crisp September morning in 2025. Front page above the fold, with a stark image of charred passport remnants sourced from the video. It garnered immediate acclaim. Civil rights icons like Al Sharpton praised it on Twitter as a blueprint for justice, while senators from both parties cited it in floor speeches. The piece shifted the narrative from sensationalism to substance, prompting a bipartisan coalition in Congress to convene emergency hearings on CBP reforms. Angela was subpoenaed to testify, not as a victim, a role she rejected, but as an expert witness. Her Pulitzer credentials lending gravitas. The hearing room in the Hart Senate office building was packed. Cameras flashing, aides scribbling notes, protesters chanting outside with signs reading "Reform CBP Now." Seated at the witness table in a tailored Navy suit, Angela faced the committee. Chaired by a veteran senator from California, her voice steady as she outlined recommendations. "Ladies and gentlemen, my experience at LAX is not unique. Consider the 2021 whistleblower accounts from Port Huron, where CBP officers admitted to daily racial profiling under pressure from superiors, or the 2025 DHS rebuttals to media claims of ICE targeting Hispanic communities and Los Angeles raids denials that ring hollow against the evidence." She presented slides with statistics, a Wikipedia entry on airport racial profiling, noting its persistence post-9/11s, a CFR timeline of post-war immigration policy highlighting states' attempts at anti-profiling laws amid federal inaction. The hearings unfolded over 3 grueling days, each session unveiling new layers without retreading old ground. Day 1 focused on personal testimonies, a Sikh traveler from New Jersey recounting turbine searches at Dulles that bordered on religious discrimination. A Nigerian immigrant describing asset forfeitures at Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson based on unfounded suspicions. Angela moderated a panel, ensuring diverse voices amplified the issue's intersections with gender and religion. Day 2 delved into policy critiques. Experts from the American Immigration Council dissected CBP's 2020 deployment to protests, arguing it fostered a culture of impunity. A POGO report from 2023 was invoked, detailing the border zone extending 100 miles inland where constitutional protections seemed diluted, leading to arbitrary stops. Angela pushed for specifics. We need not just training, but audits external, not self-regulated, to measure efficacy. On day 3, solutions dominated. Proposals for a new, independent oversight board modeled after civilian review panels. In major cities, ENHANCED data collection on stops to track disparities, and funding reallocations from militarized equipment to de-escalation programs. James's fate intertwined with these proceedings, though Angela rarely mentioned him directly, viewing him as a symptom rather than the disease. His arraignment in a Los Angeles federal courthouse drew crowds, protesters clashing with a smattering of supporters waving back the badge signs. Under the glare of courtroom lights, James pleaded guilty to reduced charges in a plea deal. 8 years in prison, no parole eligibility for 5, plus restitution for Angela's passport and emotional distress. The judge, a nonsense Latina appointee, lectured him sternly. "Your actions exemplify the abuses we've seen in reports from Michigan to Puerto Rico profiling that erodes public trust." As handcuffs clicked shut, James glanced at the gallery. His eyes hollow, a far cry from the swaggering officer who'd lit the match. In-prison intake at a medium-security facility in Victorville. He faced the irony, sharing a cell block with immigrants he'd once detained. There stares a silent judgment. The culmination came in December 2025, when the Gateway Equity Act, unofficially nicknamed the Angela Davis Act by Capitol Hill staffers, passed with bipartisan support. Signed by the president in a Rose Garden ceremony, Angela attended reluctantly, preferring the shadows to the spotlight. The law mandated annual implicit bias training with third-party evaluations, established a national database for complaints accessible to the public, and required body cameras at all major ports of entry, with footage reviewable by an independent board comprising civil rights experts and former officers. It drew from the hearing's recommendations, incorporating elements from a 2025 DHS fact-check on media narratives to ensure transparency in rebuttals. Angela watched the signing from the sidelines, Michael at her side, his hand squeezing hers. "This is your legacy," he murmured. She shook her head. "It's ours and theirs," gesturing to the diverse crowd of advocates who'd lobbied tirelessly, months later, as spring bloomed in 2026. Angela received her replacement passport in the mail, its crisp pages a blank canvas for future stamps. Flipping to the inside cover, she traced the DOJ seal, now a symbol not of privilege, but of responsibility. She had turned down book deals and speaking tours, focusing instead on follow-up reporting, a series tracking the Act's implementation, spotlighting early successes like reduced complaints at LAX and ongoing challenges in rural border stations. James, from his cell, caught glimpses of her on prison TV, his bitterness softening into regret as he enrolled in a rehabilitation program, confronting his biases through mandated counseling. The story's ripple effects continued. Inspired lawsuits in states like Arizona and Texas challenged similar abuses, while international airports adopted voluntary reforms to preempt scandals. In the end, Angela's triumph wasn't in the courtroom's gavel or the law's ink, but in the quiet transformations. A young black woman gliding through customs unharassed, her dignity intact. A Latino family reuniting without fear of separation. And Asian travelers, devices untouched by unwarranted scrutiny. It was justice redefined, not as punishment's blaze, but as prevention's steady light, ensuring the winds of change rerouted for generations to come, a narrative far richer than any single act of destruction could ever dim.